The sun had nearly slipped beneath the dusty hills when a lone rider entered the town of Elkhorn Ridge. His boots were worn, his coat carried the red dirt of the open plains, and the weight in his saddlebag spoke louder than his silence. The townsfolk, few and quiet, watched him from behind cracked windows and half-closed doors. Travelers were not uncommon in Elkhorn, but those who came asking about the old barn on the edge of town rarely stayed long. The stranger, Silas Boone, wasn't here by chance. He didn't stop to admire the town, didn't ask about the weather or the nearest saloon. Instead, his eyes scanned the outskirts, settling on the rotting silhouette of a barn that stood crooked in the fading light, as if time itself had chosen to forget it. He hadn't even dismounted when she appeared. Miss Ivy, barefoot and thin as a stick, with white tangled hair and eyes clouded by age or madness, no one could say for sure. She stood on the porch of a forgotten house, clutching a shawl around her like a shield against memory. Her voice was little more than a breath, but it carried far more weight than anyone gave it credit for. The warning came then. Simple, quiet, strange, and it was ignored. Silas kept riding, the warning echoing behind him like a shadow clinging to his boots. He didn't know the stories. He didn't know about the silence the barn brought, or the men who went near it and were never seen again. All he knew was the name etched into a faded letter he carried, and the symbol on the back that matched the mark above the barn's warped door. Night began to fall. Lamps flickered in windows. Doors latched. And high above the barn, where the wind howled through broken boards, a single raven circled and cried, as if it too had once heard the whisper. The town of Elkhorn Ridge had the look of a place long forgotten by progress. The paint peeled off wooden walls, horses moved slower here, and even the wind carried the weight of old secrets. Silas Boone didn't ask many questions, but the ones he did ask cut straight to the bone. He wanted to know about the barn, where it came from, who owned it, and what happened there 20 years ago. No one answered. The saloon, the only lively place in town, went quiet when he spoke. Glasses froze mid-air. Conversations died before they began. Men stared at their boots, and the piano man stopped playing like someone had shut off the music in his soul. The bartender offered vague words, just weather, cattle, and how rough the road must have been. But Silas noticed the way his hand trembled when he handed over the drink. Not fear of the stranger, fear of what the stranger might stir up. In the back of the room sat a man with gray whiskers and a tarnished star, barely clinging to his coat. The ex-sheriff, drunk, forgotten, muttering to himself between swigs. Only when Silas mentioned the barn again did the old man raise his head and speak not to Silas, but to the ghosts around him. 3 men went in. That's what he said. 3 men with torches, whiskey in their veins, and hate in their eyes. They never came back. What came out of that barn instead was a fire, screams, and a silence that spread like smoke through the town and never lifted. Miss Ivy, the mad woman on the porch, was the only one left from that family. Her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchild, all gone. People said the fire took them, but no bodies were ever buried. Just ashes and rumors. That night, Silas took a room at the inn. It was quiet, too quiet. As he lay on the thin mattress, eyes fixed on the ceiling, something shifted in the darkness outside. A soft sound like footsteps in dust. A voice, whisper, thin, childlike. It called his name. He sat up. The window was shut. The voice faded as quickly as it had come, but something deep in his bones told him the barn hadn't been empty in a very long time, and whatever was inside it remembered him. Morning broke slow over Elkhorn Ridge, casting long shadows across the brittle earth. Silas Boone rose before the sun, his eyes sharp with purpose. The whispers from the night before hadn't shaken him. They'd only confirmed what he already suspected. That barn held answers. The ride to the edge of town was quiet. No birds sang, no wind stirred. The barn loomed ahead like a scar on the land, half collapsed. Its roof caved on one side, the wood blackened with age and something else, something older than fire. The doors were chained shut. Rusted iron links crossed the handles, held together by a thick padlock, almost ceremonial in its placement, as if someone wasn't trying to keep people out, but something in. Silas dismounted, pulled a crowbar from his pack, and forced the chains apart with patient strength. The sound of metal breaking echoed across the empty fields like a warning shot, but no one came. No one ever came near the barn. Inside, dust hung in the air like breath frozen in time. The wooden floor groaned beneath his boots. Piles of broken tools and crates lay scattered across the room, untouched for decades. Cobwebs draped over the rafters like funeral veils. Then he saw it, a small, wooden trunk near the back wall, partially hidden beneath a burned tarp. Carved initials on its side, I am the same letters that had appeared in the letter he carried. He knelt beside it and opened the lid. Inside lay a faded journal, its leather cracked and pages yellowed with age, a child's blanket, scorched at the corners, and beneath them all a silver locket, still shining despite the years. He opened it slowly. One side held a photo, a young woman with kind eyes and braided hair. The other side was empty, but scratched into the metal were 4 letters, S. B. Silas Boone. The pieces began to shift in his mind like dust settling after a storm. He turned to the wall and spotted an old photograph nailed above the window. Faded, but clear enough. A family of 3. The same woman from the locket. A man holding a baby, and the man, he had Silas's face. The photo in the barn didn't lie. The resemblance was unmistakable. The man in the picture was a mirror of Silas, just younger, with eyes that held the same fire. And now, as dust danced in the morning light, the truth crept out from the corners of memory like a ghost, finally given a name. Silas turned back to the trunk and opened the brittle journal. The handwriting was uneven, hurried at times, stained with dirt, ash, and something darker. It began with hope. The entries spoke of a young couple building a life together on the outskirts of Elkhorn Ridge. A man named Isaac, Miss Ivy's son, and his wife, a woman from a nearby tribe, cast out for marrying across bloodlines. They lived quietly, worked the land, and had a child, but the town had not forgiven. The later pages of the journal grew desperate. Words scratched harder into the page, sentences trailing off mid-thought. Warnings, a preacher rallying men against the shame that barn represented. Ivy had begged them to leave town, but Isaac had been stubborn. He believed the world would change. It didn't. One final entry, barely legible, spoke of fire, of boots at night, of voices shouting, a baby crying, and a mother screaming. Then silence. No bodies were buried. No names were cleared. The town declared it an accident. Ivy went mad with grief, or so they said. She had lost her son, her grandson, and whatever hope she had left. But she hadn't lost everything. A line in the journal hinted at what came next. Someone had taken the child. A neighbor? A distant relative? The words stopped before the name could be written. But Silas didn't need it. He knew who that child was now. He had carried the letter for years, never knowing the full truth. The barn had not just been the place where a family died. It was the place where he had survived. The whispers made sense now. Ivy hadn't lost her mind. She had been waiting, hoping, protecting what little memory remained. Silas stood still in that broken barn, surrounded by the ashes of his past. He had come searching for answers. What he found was blood, legacy, and a lie so deep the whole town had buried it beneath silence. But not anymore. The sun was high by the time Silas walked back into town, each step heavier than the last. Dust clung to his boots, and the locket swung gently in his hand, catching the light like a blade. His face had changed not in appearance, but in purpose. The weight of legacy now sat in his shoulders, and the truth burned in his chest like wildfire through dry brush. He passed familiar eyes, shopkeepers, ranch hands, townsfolk who had lived for decades pretending they'd forgotten what happened. They watched him silently, unsure of who he was, yet feeling the echo of someone they once wronged. At the heart of town, he stopped. He pulled the old photograph from his coat, held it up. Faces went pale. He didn't need to explain. Some recognized the man in the picture. Others recognized the woman and the child. A few had been there the night the barn burned. A few had helped light the match. The silence was louder than a gunshot. Then came the question, quiet, calm, sharp as a knife pressed to the soul. Who chained the barn from the outside? No one answered. Not out loud. But heads dropped. Eyes turned away. The guilt in that town had been hidden for 2 decades beneath fences and handshakes, under church bells and unspoken rules. Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth had already done the shouting. Some believed he came back to reclaim his bloodline. Others feared he returned for justice. The law never delivered. And a few of those who truly knew what happened suspected it wasn't justice he wanted. It was memory. It was reckoning. And maybe it was revenge. The old woman on the porch, Miss Ivy, sat watching it all. Her eyes no longer wandered. Her hands no longer trembled. She knew who he was now. Her grandson. Her blood. The last ember of a fire they tried to kill still burning. As Silas turned to leave, a gust of wind rolled through town, stirring dust, creaking signs, and knocking the silence from the buildings like old paint. Behind him, the people of Elkhorn Ridge stood in the wreckage of their own lies, and knew that some barns never really burned down.